Blog Talk Radio.
Alternative facts.
The following message is transmitted at the request of the United States government. At 12:07 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, numerous unidentified objects of unknown intent and unknown origin were detected at high altitudes over multiple locations of Earth's outer space by the National Radio Astronomy Observatory, and these objects are presumed to be some form of controlled aircraft. It is not known if more of these aircraft will arrive, or if they will attempt entering Earth's atmosphere. United States citizens are encouraged to monitor local media outlets, as more updates will follow as information becomes available. The following message is transmitted at the request of the United States government. Attacks by the undead have been reported in several states across the country. The dead are rising from their graves and are attacking the human race. At this time, it is expected that more attacks of this nature will occur in several other states in the next few hours. The intent behind their attack is unknown at this time. He has been observed that a bike or exchange of fluids is a method of transmission. This is an extremely dangerous situation if they crave the taste of human flesh. It is not known whether this event will last for hours, days, or even longer. Stay calm, as authorities have been dispatched to deal with these creatures. An all-clear siren will be sounded when this situation is under control. Pacific Standard Time, nor is detected a long-range nuclear missile launch. This missile is believed to be headed in the direction of all residents within a 400-mile radius of this area should seek a fallout shelter immediately.
Welcome to Within the Chaos with your host, Rodney Shortridge.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. You can listen in by going to blogtalkradio.com/Within the Chaos, or listen in by phone. You can dial 323-870-4197. And you can also call in to ask questions to our guests at the same number, 323-870-4197. From deep within the heart of the Appalachians, I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you all for listening to Within the Chaos. My name is Rodney Shortridge, and I'll be your host tonight.
Feel me losing control. can see in your eyes that it's just about over. I can see in your lies that I'm just about over this life with you goes on and on. Why don't you stand up? There's nothing left to scream about. And shut your mouth. There's nothing left to talk about. You never let it out. I never let it go. I'm living days on fire. I'm spinning out of control. I can see in your eyes that it's just about over. I can see through your lies that I'm just about over there. So why won't you tell me if you lost your fucking mind? Why don't you stand up? There's nothing left to scream about. Shut your mouth. There's nothing left to talk about. Stand up, back it up and stand up now. Stand up, there's nothing left to scream about. Back it up, there's nothing left to talk about. You never let it out, you never let it go. You never let it out, you never let it go. If I can let it out, if I can let it go. Stand up, back it up. Stand up, and stand up now. Stand up
If you've answered, I can't hear you. All I heard was a beep. If you can hear me, I'm very suspicious about this right now because this will be the third show in a row in the last month that unusual technical glitches have prevented doing the show, or have stopped it halfway through. Try calling me. Hello? Well, isn't this interesting? I can't hear you. They really don't want me talking, I guess. Hello?
Okay, I'm back on. I think I'm on. Let's see. Let's see if I can get him on. I apologize for all these technical problems we've had the past couple of weeks. I do not know what's going on. But hopefully this will, as soon as Mr. Bosley calls in. Well, maybe I'll just call him. See if I can do that.
Hello?
Okay, I hope it worked this time.
Yeah, I can hear you now. I'm not exaggerating. This is weird, and I'm somebody who doesn't usually go for they're messing with me type theories, but this one's for the books.
Well, I apologize for all the trouble. I mean, I've had the past 2 weeks. I've had trouble connecting with guests, and I don't know what's going on. If it's on my end, or other people's end.
It's not your end. Are we on air right now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Because your listeners might find this interesting. The last 2 shows I've done in about the last 4 to 6 weeks have been shut down in the middle of the show. One of them I had to go back and do another hour. Another one we just did a shorter version because we started on Skype. We tried, I think, even Zoom or something else. The computer issue shut down. So then we went to the landline. And then when we went to the landline, we were about, halfway into that when there was a strange sound on the phone and everything got glitched up there. And now this is basically the 3rd show in a row I've done. I think in the last 6 weeks is the spread of time that, something's been screwed with. And just for the record, it's not you. My house phone landline, dead. That's never dead. That's always my go-to. 0 line. And the internet connection decided to glitch out. And this was all right at 7 o'clock when I was supposed to, call you and be on the show. And, 30 minutes ago, none of the TVs work. In fact, my cell phone, I'm surprised you got through because for the last 20 minutes, my cell phone hasn't wanted to even connect to Signal. We're not even talking about the Wi-Fi in the house. The Wi-Fi is down. We're talking about the Signal. What does this have to do with, these shows? Well, the last 2, I was talking about Secret Space Program. So what are we talking about tonight?
Well, I was going to kind of go through a wide range of topics, but since you talked about, I know Donald Trump talked about some kind of Space Force.
Yeah. I think we already have a secret space program, of course, but I don't think it's on the level that he's talking about. So personally, I'm all for it because I think ultimately us regular folk are going to find out that we really need something like that. So to me, that's a good thing when I hear that.
Now, I know I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, unless the military-industrial complex thinks it's dirty hooks into that, and then we find ourselves in off-planet wars that are unnecessary. But that's a whole other discussion.
Oh, yeah. Oh. Well, I know I read somewhere about a Marine that supposedly spent a number of years on a military base on Mars. Have you?
Yeah, I heard that too.
Well, at least I know I didn't just make it up.
You didn't make it up, but I think he did.
That's what I was afraid of, because it just didn't make no sense.
Yeah, I heard that one, and
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. We're for each other.
That's all right. We're so excited that we actually get to talk. It's like we're both trying to jump in there, and it's like, wow.
Yeah, I know. I'm seriously. I'll say it again. I'm usually someone I try to remain down to earth and skeptical because, this tech world we live in, everybody knows things glitch all the time and we're used to it. But there are times when you got to look at the context and you got to look at when it happens and, you got to wonder, okay, maybe I finally got on somebody's list, they didn't like what I said about something. I don't know. I don't lose sleep over this, though.
Well, yeah. if you're on their list, I take it I might be on that list too. Yay!
Cool. I want to be there too.
We're on the list.
The way I look at it, if we're on such a list, that means we must be doing something right.
Exactly. Well, first off, sir, I want to thank you, for your service for our country,
Sure.
And also, can you discuss anything about your military career and your training, along with the type of work you did with the military and the FBI?
Mm-hmm. Excuse me, swallowing some water there. Yeah, absolutely. I when I worked for the FBI, I was essentially a counterintelligence specialist. Now, that's not a title. What my credential said was an investigative specialist. I was on a surveillance team. I was a non-agent employee who did operational work. And basically that was doing surveillance on known KGB and GRU agents. In my case, I was on a team in San Francisco. I loved the work. I continued doing physical surveillance throughout my career, became kind of a specialist at it. And then I was a language specialist, specifically Russian. So in both instances, I worked in the counterintelligence arena, specifically what they called the Foreign Counterintelligence Division, which was changed to the National Security Division back in the 90s, I think. And so all my FBI time, non-agent, again, was spent in counterintelligence. And then I went into the Air Force, earned my commission, and served all of that time on active duty as a special agent of the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, the AFOSI. And I did that for 6 years as an agent. I worked in Los Angeles, and then I was chief of a counterespionage operations branch in Ohio at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base for 3 years. During that time, deployed to Saudi Arabia, so I had a little overseas fun, as it were. And then after I left the Air Force, I went into counterterrorism as a consultant for a private contract for corporate clients in counterterrorism, doing that all over the world. And left that in 2006. And I'm currently a writer, a researcher. I'm a licensed private investigator, and just kind of a guy who writes weird books.
Well, what's the strangest and weirdest case that you've ever investigated?
Oh, well, you mean either agent or PI or whatever, the whole kit and caboodle? Actually, the strangest is what I've written about in the Empire of the Wheel books, by far. Marco Polo is credited with saying when he died that he had not written about half of what he had seen and done, and that's kind of how Empire of the Wheel is. There are things I encountered while researching that and investigating that, which I do not discuss publicly and which never end up in the books. And it has to do with synchronicity, just a lot of synchronicity. What author, a friend of mine named Seshari, who I have also published in the past, calls karmic frequencies. And boy, you name it. When you get into the synchronicities and the karmic frequencies, you get into time phenomena, you get into the potential for past life type information, theoretically, hypothetically. You get into all sorts of, I've encountered, strange phenomena through the years that I was really primarily investigating the Empire of the Wheel mystery, which, of course, I've written 3 books specifically about that whole thing. And honestly, I kind of took a break from it. That's how I ended up writing the Secret Missions books and the other stuff that I've written, is because I needed a break from that strange empire, as it were, because the high strangeness just keeps piling up if you don't take a break.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, Walter. My question for you tonight is, what started your journey and research into lost civilizations?
Oh, well, that, I think honestly, whenever you ask a question like that, you can always, there's always a starting point that you like to mention, and then you remember that actually it started, before then. But honestly, I think it's, I was predisposed to, because I was interested in that stuff as a kid, but I really think it started in the late 80s, early 90s, when I discovered David Hatcher Childress's books, his Lost Cities and Ancient Mysteries stuff. And when I guess I had first read about, the lost civilizations possibly having something to do with UFOs, specifically when Jacques Vallée talked about these mysterious Tuatha De Danann maybe being involved with UFO encounters and stuff. And I'd never heard that before. I thought, what does the arcane, mysteries of the ancient past have to do with this at that time, what I thought was a modern phenomenon of UFOs? And I think that's what really kicked it off. And from that perspective, the more I learned, the more I became fascinated with the mysteries of the ancient world in general. So at that time, we're talking, it was late 80s, early 90s. It was during that period of my life that I was with the FBI. So this was very much what I did in my spare time. It's one of those things where at work, you're the stalwart, nose to the grindstone fed, and then at night you come home and, flip the weird switch and fill your head with all sorts of strange things. So yeah, I've been interested in this stuff for about 30 years and, finally decided to start writing about it just, not too long ago, relatively.
What type of investigating tools do you use during your research? Well,
just anything you can imagine a writer would use, of course. There's the academic resources, be it encyclopedias, books, references on history, going online, of course, where you can find reputable sources there. And, that you have to be careful with online, of course. Going to, experts, going to, of course, libraries and museums, and, of course, going out into the field. I love going into the field. And beyond that, I have probably on the more strange end of the spectrum, I have used remote viewing on occasion. I have consulted with, I have tried consulting with psychics. I just want to caveat that, when I use these things, I use them in a very limited fashion. And the stuff that I get out of that, I really just use as possible threads to pull. I never, ever put anything in my books that has just solely come from the rare occasions that I use that stuff. I won't put anything in my books that stuff has ever pointed to unless and until I have pulled that thread and followed up on it academically and in the field with as much, kind of historical or material evidence as I can find. I'm very strict with myself about that. I will not allow myself to put something in the book that simply because, I remote viewed it or I remote viewed this little nugget and, I won't do that. In my final work, I like to, have some type of tangible source. And if I don't have that and I'm speculating, I also identify that clearly, that I am speculating, and every time I do speculate. And that in itself is a tool, It's thinking outside the box. It's letting your imagination kind of feel out a situation. And, some people call it, thinking obliquely, or there's another term that's escaping me right now. And anyway, you get the idea, going at something from a broken symmetry, as it were, perpendicularly. I stumbled over my tongue there. But this in itself can be a tool, because you just go at something and, again, what emerges or what you come to are actual real world threads that you can pull academically or materially or something like that. So it's just kind of a grab bag, you might say.
Well, how did you learn to do remote viewing? Did you learn that while you was in the military or at the FBI?
Interestingly, no, I did not learn how to do this formally, and I'll explain what I mean by formally after. I did not learn to do this formally until 2007, when, I got out of the military in 99. And in 2007, I got a call from a complete stranger. This is kind of an interesting story, I think so. A call from a complete stranger sometime in April or May of that year. And we talked on the phone for almost 4 hours. And in that conversation, towards the end of it, he said that he thought I might be good at this thing called remote viewing. And I explained, I've heard of that. Everybody had heard of, remote viewing by then, of course. And I specifically recalled a book I had seen while in Saudi Arabia in 96 that had been published back then. I think it was called Psychic Spies or something. It was one of the first books written about, Operation Stargate, Grill Flame, whatever you want to call it. The Army guys, Joseph McMoneagle and Lynn Buchanan and all those guys. And that secret Army project, remote viewing project. And so that was my knowledge of that in 2007. But I had this mentor for many years, and he had told me about remote viewing, but didn't describe it with those terms way back in 1986. So I had this vague awareness of it. But I tried it formally in 2007 because the gentleman who called me asked if he could send me the materials. So he sent me several CDs, and it was pretty much spelled out there in the CDs, and I did it. And I was very surprised at even getting results. So I started doing it a lot, and found out that, there's something to this. I can't say exactly what it is, but there is something to it. And that's how I learned it.
Wow. So what's the difference between remote viewing and astral projection?
Well, in my personal description, and remember, I'm not an RV expert by any means, the way I see it is, in astral projection, it's less formal. It's remote viewing. What you're using a particular protocol. You're using a formatted on sheets of paper, a formatted protocol, which are step by step. You just go through this process. Whereas now it's a form of astral projection because you are, in a way you could say you're kind of detaching not really detaching, because in astral projection, as we have heard, that you're still connected by a silver cord, but you're sending your consciousness, your soul out somewhere away from your physical body. In essence, that's kind of what you're doing with your consciousness in remote viewing. Some would say that it's not so much that you're sending it away, more so that you are literally viewing remotely by tapping your subconscious into the ether, as it were, and you're just looking around. It's kind of like this, if you're in the middle of a big city, okay, and you can cast your vision up to the top of a skyscraper and look around, okay, but still physically, you're down on the ground. It's like astral projection in that sense, but again, it has a protocol, a form of protocol that you're following, whereas in astral projection, you can just lay there and go through your own process and do it.
Well, have you ever been, afraid or have some type of spiritual awakening at an ancient site during your research or investigation? If so, can you explain what happened?
Sure. At ancient sites, one in particular, in Ollantaytambo in Peru, I had a healing experience, relatively mild. Basically, everybody on the trip had kind of the ick, the stomach ick, and fortunately, mine wasn't too bad. A lot of that had to do with the altitude. I had spent the previous 30 days in Bogota, Colombia, on my job, so I had gone through the axe in the head and the god awful altitude headaches and yuck, and acclimatized myself for 30 days before going to Peru. But still, even after that, I had kind of the ick. And on this particular day that the group was going to Ollantaytambo, I wasn't going to go with them to the ancient site. I was just going to kind of take it easy around the little resort we were staying at. And then I just decided, you know what, I paid for this trip to come see these things. I'm not going to sit at the hotel even for a single day, So off I went with the group, and we went walking up to the site there. You can look it up online, Ollantaytambo. And the ancient site is up there in the hills, the mountain overlooking the village. And it apparently is a site that is very much heavy with crystal, geophysical makeup, whatever. I'm sorry, I'm stumbling on my words here. And I noticed that by the time we got up there and been up there about 10 minutes or so, I felt fine. The ick was gone. I didn't feel, any issues with the slight headache. It was kind of like, sinus pressure kind of thing. That was gone. And for the rest of the trip, I was not bothered with any of the altitude issues. I was fine. I found that real interesting. The place, I don't know if the place has a reputation for that, but that was my experience there. And I usually let people make of it what they will. Now, as far as other sites that may not be particularly ancient, again, going back to the Empire of the Wheel research, I had another healing experience a few years after the first one, right here on Mount Rubidoux in the Inland Empire, Southern California. And that was a really interesting situation, because what caused the affliction was a strange occurrence at a site 3 days prior. Now, in my books, I write about the goddess Hecate and strange things associated with Hecate and this mystery that I've stumbled upon. And this day we're talking about was the day that the only way I can put it is, it was the day I was, let's say, formally introduced to Hecate. And I had gone to a site connected with the telluric current, which people who are familiar with my books know that I write about. I was investigating something for my associate I mentioned earlier, Sesh Hari, because he does my telluric current maps. And I was investigating something for him, and there was some interesting Hecate association there. And I decided to get cute, and I'm sitting in the rose garden, not knowing at this time that roses are associated with her. Isn't that interesting? And I said, okay, show me something. And, kind of laughed to myself, got up, got in the car, and, headed back to the freeway. And by golly, instead of going to the freeway, I suddenly decided on my own to turn on Victoria Boulevard and take the scenic route back. And long story short, I come upon this hill, this very interesting hill, kind of sticking out like a sore thumb. And I decided, I think I'll take a look over there. And what I found there was a quarry, a very old quarry, which I think I write about in the Empire of the Wheel 3 is the one in which I show the quarry and talk about that. But I go to the quarry. This thing dates back to the 1880s or 1890s. And I'm there for about 15, 20 minutes. It has a very Lovecraftian feel. And I get in the car and I decide to drive home. And now it's about 20 minutes from this quarry to my house. And in that 20-minute drive, I felt suddenly all my energy draining out, like I was coming down with, cold or something. All my energy was draining out. And by the time I got home, I felt feverish. And then within a few minutes after that, I started feeling my neck and shoulder, right shoulder, neck, tightening up. And, within a few minutes later, it was in pain, and I had no range motion. If I wanted to look right, I had to turn my whole body. Now, this went on for about 3 days when I suddenly got the bright idea that I wanted to go up on Mount Rubidoux and take a look at something there, something called the Peace Tower. So in this condition, which I had no business driving, but there I was carefully driving in this pain and stiff neck, I go and I do this walk up Mount Rubidoux, all stiff neck and pain. I get up to the Peace Tower, and it's a round granite tower. And I get up there, I'm looking around, and there's a window in the thing. So I reach up and I pull myself up, and I'm looking in the window, and I'm looking all around, and that's when it hits me. I had reached up and pulled myself up, and I was looking all around. For the last 3 days, I hadn't been able to look around. That's when I realized suddenly the pain was gone. There was no stiffness. I had full range motion. After touching that tower, getting up that hill and touching that tower. And I write about that, I think. It's one of the rare times that I write about these kinds of experiences in my books. I don't mind talking about them sometimes, but it's more rare that I write about them in the books. But I just felt that to make the point I'm making in the book, in that particular instance, I told that story. And it's one of those things where, you'll find that I never try to convince anybody of anything. I just, kind of tell what happens, and I let the reader or the listener decide for themselves. I don't hard sell anything, but, that's one of the examples of, some of the strangest things that have happened.
Wow. Well, what's been the most disturbing, evidence that you've found on a site or ancient site?
I don't know if I've ever found disturbing evidence at an ancient site. The most disturbing things that I have ever found really are informational types of things. For instance, again, in the Empire of the Wheel mystery, 3 children were murdered. Now, this happened in 1915 here in the San Bernardino Valley. And, it's a total of 7 mysterious deaths that I focus on in that research. 4 of them were adults. And 3 of those looked like they could have been suicides. And, okay, you can give that to them. Yeah, that could have been suicide. And the 4th adult death, of that number, it was actually the 2nd death chronologically, looked like it could have been an accident. But the 3 children, those were murder. And even at the time, you could tell by reading the newspaper accounts and what the police said and what was going on. Even with the newspapers getting details from one paper to the next, one day to the next, a little bit wrong here and there. Basically, what was coming through, the signal that was coming through strongly was that these children were murdered, and that's what the police believed. Now, 2 of them were little brother and sister, 4 years old and 2 years old. and the police came to the conclusion that they were given poison candy, and they cleared the parents. They never even they never had a suspect that they identified. It was just this mystery guy or whoever gave these two children poison candy, and when the candy was tested, the toxin could not be identified. The same thing happened to a 14-year-old girl, the third child victim, a 14-year-old girl in Redlands. She had been given, they found a poisoned orange. And again, they tested the orange. They found a toxin. They knew there was something there. They couldn't identify it. Now, some people would say, but Walter, this was 103 years ago. Maybe they just weren't good at that. No. You look at the history. By 1915, laboratories were pretty darn good at being able to identify toxins and poisons, because back then it was one of the most popular, if not for a while, the most, not just one of the most, but the most, I think, for a while back then, most popular method of murder. So they were pretty good at identifying toxins, and yet here you had two cases that allegedly had nothing to do with each other, in which all three victims were given something to eat, and all three victims ate something with this toxin that could not be identified. Now, okay, I'm a former criminal investigator, and to me, that kind of smells like a rat. To me, that says it looks like they might have had a serial killer on their hands. And that was what really kind of made me latch on to this and go with this whole research and investigation before I even wrote the first book, was my gut told me, based on the story of these children, was that there was a serial killer loose. And I do think even the four adults, I think their deaths were foul play. And that's what I go into in the first book.
What are some of your favorite places that you've researched, and why?
Places. Well, again, going back to the books, in my later stuff, of course, I've written about an interesting group called the Sonora Aero Club. And these were some guys in the little Tuolumne County up by Yosemite in California, and they allegedly, according to the man who wrote their story in the 1890s, they allegedly were building flying machines in the 1850s. 10 years before the American Civil War, which that's a whole discussion in itself. But I've gone up to that area, specifically the little towns these guys lived in and functioned in, and the alleged area that they were flying these things around in, up in Tuolumne County. And I've gone up there on 2 research trips. And I'll tell you, I love the area. It's a wonderful area. I could live there. But it's just an interesting place because you see the places that the guy, his name was Charles Delshow, he's the one who, writes about the Sonora Aero Club in his diaries. You can see the places that he's talking about where these guys did these things. Now, I was hoping to pinpoint specific structures or addresses that he talks about in the little town Columbia and in, of course, downtown Sonora. But the best remaining site is where the little Columbia Airport is. Now, it's a private airport, and it's one of the last that has a grass runway. Very interesting. And that area where they built this airport, and this is interesting too, where they built this airport is where the Sonora Aero Club used to go out there and secretly fly their things around. So think about that. The area where these guys in the 1850s were allegedly flying their contraptions around ends up becoming the area where they build the private airport, a century later. or in the next century. I find that to be a really interesting coincidence there. But Sonora, it's a wonderful, wonderful place. I love going up there. I feel like I always find some new insight on the research I've done about the Aero Club every time I go up there. And I welcome a chance to go there every time I get one. But I really like going to sites where, there something might be ancient, but you're not sure. I just like to go see this stuff firsthand. And, it's kind of rare, but one of them is the Arrowhead here in the San Bernardino Valley, which, again, I've written about that. In fact, I wrote an article about it that was in World Explorer magazine. But it may or may not have been put there by a lost ancient civilization. And you can go see it here. It's not hard to get to. But, those are just a couple of the interesting things that I like to go look at.
Can you tell us about your experience at Disney?
Oh, yeah. That really kicked off my nonfiction writing. In '81, I was still in high school. I hadn't graduated yet. And I went to Disneyland with some friends. Now, the listeners who are native to Southern California, you know how this is. You go to Disneyland a lot, it's just there, and you'd go. These days it's way too crowded and far too expensive. But, in those days it was a lot cheaper and, not crowded at all, particularly after the sun went down. So I'm there with some friends, and for some reason we were there on a Wednesday night. So I think it was, it was a break during school. It might have been spring break for all I know, but it was a Wednesday night in the 9 o'clock hour. And we were riding the carousel, and I saw this old man standing there watching the carousel go around, and he caught my eye. It was, the snow white hair and kind of shortish hair, and not too long of a beard, kind of a nicely trimmed crop beard, black suit, white shirt. I don't recall him wearing a tie. And he was just standing there watching the carousel go around. And then on the last couple of go-arounds, I noticed he wasn't there. So, whatever. So we get off the carousel. We start walking towards the Matterhorn, which past the teacup area. Those familiar with Disneyland know what I'm talking about. And there was the old guy sitting on one of the benches, kind of underneath below the monorail track there. And I don't know why, but I felt compelled to engage him. And, just kind of asked if he was having a good time and if it was his first time there. He said, yeah, he'd never been here before. And the thing I noticed was he was amazed. He was absolutely amazed. It was like it was the most wonderful thing he'd ever seen. You would have thought he was a 6-year-old kid. And I placed him around, around 70 years old, something like, and this was in the days when they were just beginning to shift from the ticket books to what they called the passport ticket, the unlimited. Now it's the passport ticket where you just you pay the one price and you're in and you ride everything unlimited. But in those days, if you had to buy the passport to ride things unlimited, otherwise you got the ticket books, A through E. And he had a ticket book, and he was down to one last ticket. It was either an A or a B. He could. I noticed he could go ride Small World, and we hadn't ridden that yet that day. So me and my two friends, we went with this old guy, and we rode It's a Small World with him. And he sat in front of us, and his eyes were big, and he was just taking this all in. We all joke about Small World, but to him it was just wonderful. And we were talking after the ride, and he said his name was Alfred, and he was out of tickets, and I decided, what, I come here all the time. So somebody had a Donald Duck pin, so I pinned my passport ticket onto the lapel of his coat. I just gave it to him, and I said, hey, with this passport, You can ride whatever you want, as many times as you want. The park's open for like another hour and a half. Go have fun. And this guy, you would have thought I had given him a bucket of gold or saved his grandchild. He was incredibly grateful. He lit up. He thanked me profusely. I mean, I was just, like, oh, wow, okay. It gave me, a nice warm feeling and all that crap. And off he went into Fantasyland. And, me and my friends, we went about our business, and I felt like I'd done a nice deed for, an old guy. Well, that's what happened in 81. And about 11 years later, I'm working for the FBI. I'm in Manhattan at the old Coliseum bookstore. I don't know if it's still there. I think down from Columbus Circle. And I'm in what I affectionately call the weird book section, the kind of stuff we all like to read, And I come across this book called The Old Straight Track about these things called ley lines. And I'm looking at this and going, oh, this is interesting. And the author's name is Alfred T. Watkins. I'm like, oh, that's okay. That's kind of interesting. I'll look at this book. So I open it up, and there's a full-page photo of the author. And I immediately got goosebumps and just felt very weird because the photo of this author, Alfred T. Watkins, was the man I met at Disneyland in 1981, whose name also was Alfred. And I'm hair standing up on my arms just telling you about it now, okay? It always does this to me. And I was just floored. It was like, what the hell? Because, you see, Alfred Watkins, he died in 1935, I think. And he wrote the book in the 1920s. And I believe at the time the photo of him was taken, it said he was 69 years old. Or when he published the book, he was 69. Now, remember, the guy I met at Disneyland, as I told you, I put him around 70 years old. So I was just floored. I thought, well, what the hell do I do with this experience? What does this mean? And so for years, I wondered. Along comes 2004. I meet Greg Bishop. And a couple years later, in 2006, we're sitting on his show one night, Radio Mysterioso, just BSing and talking about weird stuff. And we're wondering, gee, how come the exclusive restaurant at Disneyland is called Club 33? We'd heard various stories. So we pulled it up online, and we found out that, because blah, 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 it was 33 this, whatever. But here's the other thing we discovered. Right there it said, on the Wikipedia or whatever it was, Disneyland, and it gives the lat long, and it was at 33 degrees latitude 33. And I thought, hey, wait a minute. That 33rd degree of latitude is associated with weird stuff like the Great Pyramids, and that's interesting that Disneyland is at the 33rd degree of latitude. And then I thought of my experience with this Alfred, and I thought, what the hell? And I decided, you know what? I need to dig into this and find out just what the heck is going on. And one thing led to another. And sure enough, you have what I've put into the book Latitude 33, Keep the Kingdom, which was my investigation into this Alfred experience. And with the help of, again, my associate Seth Cherie, who looks at things geomorphologically, the lay of the land. And he does for me telluric current maps, which is world grid type energy. And he has identified an intersection of 3 telluric current or world grid energy lines in Disneyland. Specifically, they intersect where the carousel used to sit. And that carousel was in that position the night I rode it and saw Alfred. Now, 1982, the year later, they redesigned Fantasyland and they moved some things around. The carousel was one of the things they moved. And I argue that they disengaged whatever this device was. And as the book goes into, I propose that Disneyland was physically constructed to work as a psychotronic device to enhance the experience of being in the park. Nothing evil, and all this Walt Disney was a bad man crap. Wow. Again, that's a whole other discussion. But the man who engineered Disneyland was a man named Cornelius Vanderbilt Wood. He worked for SRI, the legendary Stanford Research Institute. That's where the Disneys met him, okay? When they first, back in the 50s, started the idea to build this park. They went to SRI, and Wood was an engineer who left SRI, went to work for Walt Disney to physically engineer the building of Disneyland. So it would be C.V. Wood that I argue would have known about this intersection of these telluric currents and would have designed the park the way he did and placed the carousel on the intersection of those lines. Now, here's what's interesting. The year that I found the Alfred T. Watkins book in the bookstore, 1992, that was the year that C.V. Wood died.
Damn.
So there's a little synchronicity for you, but that in a big old giant fat nutshell is really what my whole Disneyland thing is about. And again, it's in my book Latitude 33, Key to the Kingdom, which was my first nonfiction book, and it's still I would say probably one of my two most popular nonfiction books. It's got a lot more detail than I just went into that will make you scratch your head and wonder.
What is the fascination that researchers have with the ley lines?
Well, here's the thing. First of all, you have to, when I wrote the Disneyland book and when I originally would talk about this, I would use the term ley line. And I began to use the term telluric current. And the reason for that is that a ley line is very specifically something else. Now, Alfred Watkins was, I believe, the first guy to write about it as such. But I could be wrong about that, but he's credited with being really the first guy in modern times to look at this. And ley lines specifically are straight line paths, sometimes anomalies, that run between supposed ancient sites or known ancient sites, particularly where more modern constructions have been built upon those ancient sites, like cathedrals and old churches and stuff. And the implication is that those guys in the church knew that they were tapping into whatever this layout of these straight lines leading to the ancient sites. The implication is that those church guys were tapping into that same system, that same theoretical energy, so to speak. And of course, this pattern of these sites that have these straight lines running in discernible patterns between each other, of course, tap into the world grid of energy. When we say world grid, of course, we're talking about, think of Tesla, and others who might have tapped into this, but Tesla is the most popular to grab the concept. Now, telluric energy is something that is very real. The railroad industry back in the 19th century took advantage with this because telegraphy, the old telegraph, the Morse code thing that you see in the movies now, and it's still used in some capacity. The use of this kind of rose and developed with the railroads because that's what they would use to communicate, of course. And they would, as they laid the railroad track and built the railroad, they would also string the telegraphy cable. So telegraphy and railroads went together. Now, what's interesting is the reason you find railroads following where telluric current is because the telegraphers figured this out and tapped into this natural earth energy. So it would help. What it does is it enhances the telegraphy itself, the performance of it. So, that's coincidentally, it might have been why the railroads built specifically where they laid the track instead of 100 yards over here or 100 yards over there, whatever. Now, what is telluric current? It's an ELF, an extreme low frequency energy that just runs through the planet. Now, Sesheri, he does his maps based on reading the geomorphology of the Earth, and he's got his particular system and theory of you as you follow the terrain, the riverbeds, the mountain ridges and stuff, so goes the energy, because when the Earth was forming, this energy was very much a vibrant part of that process. And as the Earth, solidified, the energy, of course, goes where, it's easier. It's kind of like water. It goes the path of, least resistance, you might say. And I am by no means a technician or scientist, so I'm probably butchering how he would describe it. But it has to do also with magnetic anomalies and mass concentrations or mass cons, that kind of thing. And it goes back to where Disneyland is concerned, is a guy like C.V. Wood at the Stanford Research Institute, being an engineer there, they would be the type of organization that would know where telluric current flows, okay? And he would be the kind of guy that would know where that kind of stuff is. He's the one that picked out the location where Disneyland is. Walt and Roy were thinking about building it maybe up in San Fernando Valley. They even thought about out here in the Inland Empire. They were thinking of other locations. But Wood, the guy who designed Disneyland, he specifically said, no, you should get this plot of 160 acres here in this place called Anaheim. And they're like, huh, what? But he said, no, this is where you want to build it. So, I see that as kind of evidence that Wood knew exactly what was flowing through that part of the terrain there. And it's very interesting. It's very interesting as a concept to explore, and it has provided much food for thought for me. It laid into some nights, I can tell you that.
That sounds like it. Well, within your research, have you studied any megalithic sites? And if so, can you explain to everyone what a megalithic site is composed of?
Again, I'm not the expert, but the megaliths are the constructions that you find all over the world, and your listeners probably know this, that are very often just big, immense, huge stones. But interestingly, very often just fitted together perfectly. In some cases, astonishingly, you couldn't slip a piece of paper between the stones, and they've been standing for thousands and thousands of years, and withstanding the elements of nature which have destroyed later constructions right next to them, and the presence of these megalithic structures has left a mystery, because none of the cultures in these places really know anything about who built these structures. Very often this is the case. Most often this is the case. They'll just say, oh, those were the other ones. Those were the people before us. Well, do you know anything about them? Nope. Or they were the gods, So what do they imply? Here's the most interesting thing about the megalithic structures. What they imply is a much more advanced technology the farther you go back in history. Now, this does not, jibe with what you're taught in academia, where it's all linear history. We started as amoebas, and, once we got up to the human level of evolution, we were in caves and, sticks and stones and blah, 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 until today we are the most technologically advanced civilization to ever live on the earth, which I haven't bought that in a long time. And these megalithic structures, these are testimony to the idea that, hey, there's something going on here that's not what we're taught. And so that implies what happened to that advanced civilization. Well, we, of course, have the stories of the natural cataclysms or, ancient wars, which kind of obliterated a lot and kind of set humankind back, a few centuries, and we've had to rebuild from there. But this, to me, is the most interesting thing, is who were these megalith builders? Why is it that you find uniform features of these structures all over the world? Whether you're looking at a megalith in Egypt or South America or, Asia or, Central, Europe, wherever, you find, the same exact features, the knobs on the stones, or you find the embedded, they're T-shaped, and what they would do theoretically was, pour the metal in there, and it would kind of link two stones together. Although interestingly, earthquakes don't knock these stones down, and those links have been gone for a long time because later civilizations would pry them out. But you will find these identical features in the cutting of a stone and the kind of basic shapes of these structures all over the world. Now, there's another thing academia teaches us, is that all these the known civilizations, they were isolated from each other. And there's no way that, East Indians could have come to the Americas, 10,000 years ago, whatever. So if there's anything alike between, Peru or in ancient Peru and ancient China, well, that was just a coincidence, and you look at this and you go, come on, guys, really? They come up with that kind of crap when they can't explain the mystery. And the mystery is that there was some globally reaching advanced civilization that was the builders of these megalithic structures and these other oddities that, match. And something happened and they left, or they've disappeared, or their civilization fell. But they were global, and, what happened to them? That's the big mystery. That's the question.
Well, why do so many researchers find Machu Picchu and Cusco so fascinating?
Well, for a variety of reasons. It's in some cases the structures that are built there. In the case of Machu Picchu, it's such a high altitude. It's, okay, where were the quarries for some of this stuff? Who were these people that, built all this? And on the one hand, people say it's a mystery as to why it wasn't discovered for the longest time. But, then on the other hand, it was way up high on a peak. And, no wonder the conquistadors couldn't find them. But, the fact that they were building in the places that they built and what they built, like, in Cusco, you've got one of these megalithic, mysteries there, because there's walls all over Cusco that are made from what I described a moment ago, these massive stone blocks that are cut to fit each other perfectly, and they've withstood earthquakes that have otherwise, obliterated what the later Spanish, the conquistadors during the Spanish conquest built. And theoretically, by the time the conquistadors came, if you listen to, academia, they were supposed to be the more advanced civilization than the ancient Peruvians. Well, you talk to the Peruvians and they'll tell you that in some cases that it wasn't their people that built these mysterious, perfectly cut, large stone walls. It was the ones who came before them. In some cases, they're just as much a mystery to the local natives. And of course, academia doesn't like to hear that because that's not politically correct. But, too bad. The evidence speaks for itself. But I think that's why, Cusco is so fascinating, and Ollantaytambo and Machu Picchu and all that. It's because these are the places where you find some of the best examples of the fingerprints of this lost civilization. It changes your outlook. I'll tell you, when I saw, this is what comes to mind, at Tiahuanaco, there, of course, by now it's been on TV all over the place. But in 2003, when I went to Peru and David Childress, dragged me and a couple other guys while the group was in the museum, and he walked us over to Puma Punku, I was astonished. The first time I laid eyes on Puma Punku, I'd never even heard of it. Least of all had seen it, and my jaw dropped. And David said, "Well, what do you think?" And I said, "This looks like the rock. In our times we would pour it in cement, but I said this looks like what was crafted into the foundation for machinery that is no longer here." David got a little smile on his face, and he said, "Well, let me tell you what the ancient legend is." And the ancient legend is essentially that. Kind of blew my mind. I had not heard this legend by that point in 2003. And just by looking at it, I'm like, well, yeah, from the 21st century perspective, that looks like where machinery was, that was a foundation for machinery, and you could see where, things would be bolted in. And he said, well, in the ancient story, it was the city built by giants, and when they left, they took their machines with them. Now, since then, Puma Punku, of course, has been on Ancient Aliens, I think, a dozen times, and been talked about by a lot of people, and poo-pooed by a lot of skeptics and stuff. But I will tell you, it was a powerful experience to go there and see that place when I went, and I'll never forget it. And if I had any ounce of doubt in a lost advanced civilization having been here on this earth, before then, after then, it was completely dissolved. Seeing that was one of the many reasons why I'm convinced that history is not as we're taught. I recommend anybody who hasn't been to go down there and see all the sites down there in South America. It's amazing.
Why is gold so important to ancient people?
Gold?
Yes.
Okay. Well, think about, the properties, the things you can do with gold, and how, we use gold. That's the inherent value of it. What's interesting is, at least, for the ancient Inca in South America, for them, they had apparently so much of it that they would just decorate everything with it, and they would make utensils, and it was almost as common as aluminum foil is for us. And there's stories of during the Spanish conquest how the natives were kind of scratching their heads, going, "Oh, well, these guys are really going nuts over the gold here." They couldn't understand why these European guys were just frothing at the mouth over it. But, they quickly understood what dastardly things these guys were willing to do to get the gold. So, we have the story of Atahualpa's wife hiding the gold when it became clear that that's all they wanted, and they were still going to murder her husband, even if she gave them their room full of gold. I think that, and I've written about this in my Secret Missions 2, The Lost Expedition of Sir Richard Francis Burton. I think the big secret to the South American gold, to the Inca gold, wasn't just that they knew where to find it, okay? Because here's what's interesting is, people have looked for the mining sources of the gold, and to this day, they haven't really found them, where the Inca got all the gold. It is my personal speculation that the Tiahuanaco Puma Punku structures were a gold manufacturing site. Yes, I mean literally manufacturing, as in what you might call an alchemical process. I think the reason that gold was so abundant to the ancient Inca in ancient South America was because they were making the stuff. They could make the stuff. Now, by the time you got to the Inca of Atahualpa's time, I don't think they possessed the process anymore. I think they might have been vaguely aware of it, and there was a bunch of gold, kind of stored. That, they were using what was left. But I think they knew the secret to this, and they didn't want, these invaders to find this. So, this story that, they hid it all in a cave, in a tunnel, I think that was just a story. I think they did not want to fess up that they were aware that the ancients could literally manufacture the stuff. And the reason that they would make this a secret is they didn't want them to find the places where the ancients, so to speak, used to do this. Puma Punku, being one. So I think that's my speculation on why the secrecy on the part of the Incas. They just didn't want these invaders to, find and understand and go poking around these sites of the lost ones, so to speak.
Well, who are the star people from the Pleiades?
Well, depends on who you ask. I'm not really an expert on that. There's a lot of what I have in the past referred to as hoo-ha out there about these kinds of things. So you have to be careful, when you venture in that territory. But I think the best way to put it is this. Somewhere in the remote past, some folks came obviously from off Earth, from off planet. And they, of course, had a sufficiently advanced technology that they appeared as godlike beings, right? From another dimension, another world or whatever. And they come here, and these types of events are the sources of things, like ancient star people from another world. And then, of course, to take it further into the other direction, that's another category of this, is, naturally they come here, of course. We have the stories of the people that come from the sky and they interbreed with Earth humans. And so naturally there are people who are convinced that some of the descendants of these star people that came from off planet, have, special abilities, special traits, which can be possibly identified and such. I think there's something to that. In a general sense, I think that the Human Genome Project, for example, is really all about identifying which among us are the descendants of these people that came from other worlds. I really do. Now, whether there are these amazing abilities, and some people say, psychic abilities and stuff, to what degree, and obviously I don't put that stuff down. I think there's something to that. I just think some people take it, really, really crazy and far. I couldn't tell you to what degree, has been found legitimately, but it's a whole grab bag of things when you get into the star people. Now, have I hit on or answered your question, or did you have a specific facet of star people lore that you were asking me about that I've missed completely?
No, you hit on it.
Okay. Because there are the people with the that they allegedly found the mummies with the different shaped skulls, the elongated skulls and stuff. And again, these are supposed to be some of the people from off planet that came here and stayed. There's a lot of monkey business that's been going on with these so-called mummies, and over the years, the skeletons and stuff, things misidentified, things just flat out faked and hoaxed. And it's too bad, because I'm a guy who is coming from the perspective of, I have no trouble with extraterrestrials existing. I have no trouble with the concept that they have come here and that they continue to come here. I got no trouble with, the existence of UFOs being, something other than our stuff. However, I think that, again, there's a lot of hoo-ha, there's a lot of nonsense out there that really hurts getting to the bottom of these subjects. It really hurts finding the actual truth, because there's so many people out there that just want to grasp onto a fantasy, or they just want to sell nonsense to make the quick buck or just get a lot of attention. And there's the people out there that want to spread, disinformation, that want to, get you off the track to the truth. So, unfortunately, when you talk about these topics, you have to address, the nonsense. And it's too bad that, energy has to be spent dealing with those things, but that's just the way it is. We have to diligently, sift through the stuff and make judgments and decisions on what we're going to accept and what we're not going to accept.
Now, you brought up the elongated skulls. Now, from what I understand, in South America, where they have the mummies or skeleton remains of the elongated skulls, and also Egypt. But I also read that I think they found some in Germany also. Was this a cultural thing worldwide, or was it, as you said, maybe some type of aliens? Or do they have any DNA proof or anything like that?
Well, again, I'm not one of the experts on the skull issue, but my understanding is that, of course, we know there were cultures who would alter the skulls of their infants and to get them shaped a certain way. And there's evidence in the lore, in the mythology, and in the cultures that they were doing this to possibly emulate the people who came from other worlds whose skulls were naturally that way. So it's kind of both and, yes, there were cultures that would do this on purpose, but yes, it's possible that they were doing it to emulate beings with skulls that are that way. And it's interesting, you bring up that these things have been found all over the world. Well, go back to what I was saying about the megalithic structures. Those are found all over the world too. So maybe there's something to these beings with these other shaped skulls, different shaped elongated skulls. Maybe they were part of the mix of advanced cultures that came here from elsewhere during this time. It's certainly a resonance, the megaliths are all over the world, and you find these elongated skull people in different places all over the world. So, there could very well be something, a nugget of truth to the more wild theories. There absolutely could be some nugget of truth there. But again, you have to kind of sift through the noise.
Mm-hmm.
What has made Easter Island such an amazing location for researchers?
Oh, I think that's because, its location, the theory is that they died off because there were no resources there. And then to continue with that theory, in building these monuments, some people think that they completely destroyed the resources there on the island to where they eventually had to leave. Then there's the issue of those statues themselves and the fact that they all face out to sea, as if, are they intended to greet, some visitors or others who were expected to come, or were the statues intended to scare off invaders or some impending, others who were supposed to come? It's all a mystery. I think the reason Easter Island is so fascinating is because, it is such a mystery. Even when you can explain the building and placement of the statues in, what we would call more mundane tangible methods, not some mysterious method of floating the boulders or whatever, which is one of the theories. Even when you can explain it in a mundane way, there is still the mystery of why they built them and why they faced them the way they did. So whatever perspective you're coming from, the very grounded, linear history, materialist, reductionist view, Easter Island is still a big mystery. Or if you're coming from the other end of the spectrum, where something very odd and strange and went on there, and in the building of these statues, they used, they rendered them movable and weightless almost through sonic technology of some sort, that end of the spectrum. Again, there's a big mystery there. And I think that's why Easter Island fascinates everybody on both ends of the spectrum and in between, is because the mystery remains no matter how you try to explain it.
Well, what are the Nazca lines, and what was their purpose? Saying that you can only, see these amazing figures from the sky, and how were they able to construct them without being able to see from the sky to put these lines and these designs on the ground?
Well, I think it's been demonstrated pretty well that the Nazca lines, first of all, they're essentially kind of scratched or scraped into the surface. They're very easy to damage. Case in point, I think in the last 6 months, we had a situation that was reported where a tourist or somebody out there was driving a truck around and destroyed a portion of one of the figures. And it was done very easily. He was basically just driving his vehicle over them. So they're very easy. They were very easy to make, and they're, in essence, they're fragile. They're pretty fragile to, to maintain. Now, it has been argued that, those who made them simply figured out, in one theory, figured out how to make a hot air balloon, essentially, out of animal skins and such. And, a sufficient height kind of guided the workers down below in making these things. And in the end, all they were ceremonial pathways or, an attempt at communication with the gods. That's the more mundane explanation, so to speak, short of the hot air balloon thing, that part. I don't know what the latest is on that. If anyone, takes that one seriously. But on the other end of the spectrum, I think a lot of people are familiar with the theory that these were directional symbols, as it were, for craft, coming to Earth from elsewhere, or at least flying craft going to different places on the planet, that allegedly these things pointed the way to certain places or certain way stations, so to speak. This is one theory, and that's the reason why they were made the way they were, so that they could be seen from a higher altitude. Off the top of my head, I don't know what the highest altitude is that they can still be seen. That would be interesting to know. I'm sure that's been reported and somebody knows that. But again, because nobody knows exactly why these things were made, because nobody left a document behind. Nobody left an instruction manual, or a museum pamphlet on the Nazca lines saying this is what they are, this is what we use them for, this is why we made them and how we made them. Nobody's ever found that. So that's why there's such a big mystery, is because nobody ever explained them. And for some people, they don't need any explanation. But for the curious, it would be nice to know.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I agree. Well, what's your opinion? I read that there was an iron hammer that was found in, I think it was England, Texas. And I read that the iron in the hammer is made of such pure iron that we can't duplicate it with our technology today. Plus, the wooden handle, is showing signs of turning into coal. it says that the hammer dates back 50 to 500 million years old. Is there any other evidence that you know of that dates back that long or longer? And is this possible?
Well, I think really the best, probably still the best book written on this is Forbidden Archaeology by Cremo and Thompson. And it's a thick book. I think it's like 5 inches thick. Maybe I'm exaggerating. It might be 3 or 4. That's that inch thing, right? And in this book, they just document case after case after case of what are called OOPArts, out of place artifacts. And it's exactly what you described. These objects that are clearly machined, okay, clearly man-made and machined, and in most cases far more advanced than it should be for the era or the level at which it's found archaeologically. And again, these things are testimony to this theory that there's this lost advanced civilization, because these things are found all over the world. And again, Cremo and Thompson really present the best book, the best argument for that in their book. They've done a shorter version called The Hidden History of Humankind or something. I think is the smaller volume. But really, Forbidden Archaeology is really the volume to get. And what I love about the book, in the first several pages of the book, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 pages, they print all the venom and the hatred that the scientific community leveled at them publicly. They just put it in the very front of the book. Here you go. This is what academia and this is what the scientific establishment thinks of this book and the things in it. And it's a hoot. You read what these scientists, basically they're shaking their fists in essence, and you crazy guys, this is hogwash. It's funny, and I think it's great that they just put that up front, and then they have their 3 or 4 inch thick book full of these out of place artifacts, like this hammer in Texas, like nuts and bolts embedded, way at a deep level that clearly it was embedded in the lava or whatever. Thousands of years ago. Well, what the hell, 10,000, 20,000, or 100,000 years ago, we were supposed to be living in caves or living in the trees, and yet here's this thing like a hammer with, tempered steel or whatever. It's one of the greatest mysteries. I love that kind of stuff. Not an expert in it, but I do love that kind of stuff, and I've explored it a little and discussed it in my books.
Yeah, I do too, because I know I've also read about fossilized footprints that are located in Utah that date back like 500 million years, and in New Mexico they also have a footprint like 250 million years. I mean, is it possible that they were humans on this planet that long ago? I mean, in your opinion?
Oh yeah, why not? I mean, if the Earth, it's very possible. Yeah. I have no problem with anything in this book in particular I'm talking about. I have no problem with anything that we're talking about in this particular field of research. These artifacts and these footprints, feet print and stuff, because we do have writings like the Ramayana, the Vedic texts that talk about things happening, millions of years ago. Just because it's not in, what are the presently accepted ancient histories doesn't mean that, it's not true. Remember, academia is like a priesthood, okay? They want to control the narrative. They want to control what the historical theory is. And they're going to see to it that, they do everything they can to keep that control. And, they're famous for trashing colleagues, only to later, the science proves that the colleague was right and they were wrong. This happened in the case of Emmanuel Velikovsky. You might not accept his entire, theory, but his basics were essentially, are to be found in plate tectonics, which is something that's, for several years now been taught, in every I think, geography and oceanography course, but initially, some of the things Velikovsky talked about, he was vilified, and by the academic and scientific establishment. Oh, he was crazy. This was nuts. And yet, it turns out that he was basically right about some things. Well, you would think that, after a couple of centuries of doing this, these guys would finally stop doing it. But, remember, there's a lot of money and professional reputation tied up in this. That's why this goes on. Think about it. You're a scientist, you're a college professor, for example, in academia. You've got your tenure, you've got your comfy position, your retirement and your position, and all this rests upon your work being valid and relevant. And along comes another guy who makes discoveries that's going to render your work no longer relevant, no longer accurate, no longer valid. Well, what is that going to do, particularly when, your wife or your husband, whoever their spouse is, they like that nice house. They like those fancy cars they drive. They like the prestige of their spouse being the head of the ancient history department of such and such university, and all their social stuff, their reputation is tied up in really their work, their theory, right? So when somebody comes along that kind of dashes that on the rocks, these guys are going to panic. They're going to freak out because, again, if they become irrelevant, then, they're afraid they're going to lose all that, particularly the reputation. So, this is what you see in what motivates a lot of this academic vilification of others who come along and make these new discoveries. It's all, as intelligent as these people are supposed to be, they just turn out to be just plain old human beings with weaknesses and foibles related to ego, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, what's your opinion about giants? I know you kind of touched on that at the beginning, especially where there's a giant footprint that's found in South Africa and well, plus across the world. But do you think that they were giants that once walked the earth?
Yeah, I do. Now, again, this is one of those subjects where you kind of have to, be careful what you embrace and carefully study what's out there. And but I think basically, very much so, I think there is indeed something to that. And I think that, again, this goes against what the scientific establishment, really wants people in some cases to know. I think there's something to the theories that the evidence gets hidden, secreted away, or locked away somewhere. There's interesting stories about the Smithsonian doing stuff like that. You got to wonder why. There's something to these stories. You got to wonder why, and really, in my mind, the answer to why is, well, it must be because there's something to the idea that there must be some evidence there, and it makes them nervous.
Yeah.
That's my position on that.
Well, as your research, I know I've read that in the Grand Canyon they found Egyptian artifacts and a Buddha statue. Has your research uncovered anything, to give credence to that?
In a general sense, I think anybody who has researched and written about the things that I have, because there's many guys out there who've done more in that field than I have. But I think in that general sense, yeah, it does corroborate these ideas. Now, what I think is going on specifically in that case is I indeed believe, I don't want to say that word. I am indeed convinced, and I do indeed think, I embrace the idea that something along those lines of a lost civilization or an ancient civilization presence, being a city or what have you, I think was indeed found in the Grand Canyon. I do think that something is being hidden from the public there. Now, whether it was specifically Egyptian or, ancient East Asian, that might be kind of like an example of the game Post Office, where whatever was really found through the tellings and through the rumor mill becomes, it was Egyptian, or it was a statue of Buddha. It might have been very much like those things, but it might not have been those things. But either way, I think yes. I think something like a lost city was found in the Grand Canyon, and they are keeping it secret. I do think that.
Mm-hmm. Well, you also investigate UFOs and cryptozoology. What's been your personal experience with UFOs or cryptos?
I don't know if you'd call me a cryptozoological researcher per se. UFOs, yeah, I've looked at that, and like a lot of us, since I was a kid, that has fascinated me. There's a whole bunch of people, millions of people like that. Repeat the question again. I want to make sure I answer it accurately.
Well, what's been your personal experience, with UFOs or with cryptos?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. Experiences with both, yes. You asked experiences. Okay. As a researcher, I'm presently convinced that 90% of what people are seeing and reporting as UFOs are actually classified technology, mostly, of course, military technology. And yes, I said 90%. But that leaves that 10% that's in that something else category. And that's still quite a big chunk of, percentage there for it to be. Because think about it, all you need is one, right? All we need is one definite UFO from another world, and that proves that theory right there. Just one, okay? So one, that 10% could be hundreds or thousands of hundreds at least of sightings, or even just dozens that I think are very possibly, other world craft. That's, academically. And of course, what goes into my opinion on this 90 percentile is the fact that, I'm an Air Force officer, and I, was exposed to, through being a counterintelligence guy, I was involved with program protection. I had to be read in, I have a clearance, and, some things I was read into and was exposed to. This goes into, my opinion and position that, most of it is technology, human military technology. That said, where experiences are concerned, and at this point, I don't like to go into it, but I have said elsewhere, I have seen, a bona fide, UFO experience, and I had someone with me, and this was just a few years ago. But that's all I like to, that's why I don't think people who report UFOs are crazy. I never thought they were before this experience. I want to make that clear. I never thought, there was nothing to UFOs before this experience. But what I'm saying is, I have to raise my hand and say, yeah, I've seen a UFO. And it wasn't just a little pinpoint of light in the night sky that suddenly made a right-hand turn. It was a little bit more substantial than that and a lot closer. But, and I've also seen, what looked like a winged humanoid figure, and I had another witness with me too, and we both saw it. And so I think there's something to this idea of, you know, the whole crypto creature thing. You know, it's an amazing world, and there's no way we know everything about it yet. It'd be kind of boring if we did. You know, this idea of the scientific establishment, it really took its deepest root in our world. I would say with in 1840, when the reductionist, materialist, bean counting, lack of imagination, drab scientists, technicians took over the Royal Society in England. Before that, the Royal Society was made up of what they called philosopher scientists. These were the guys who, they embraced the very things we've been talking about all night, okay? These are the guys who, they thought there was something to UFOs, and they were alchemists, and they, you know, attempted, they would do necromancy and all this stuff, but you had your boring bean counters, you know, who finally outnumbered the philosopher scientists in the Royal Society around 1840, and they took over the Royal Society, and then from thenceforward, they said the criteria for science will now just be materialist, reductionist, and, oh, by the way, atheist. And these were the guys who were behind pushing evolution, Darwin's evolution theory, okay, because it really fit with their atheistic point of view. And so we really, in my opinion, we have them to blame for, you know, the academic priesthood and the scientific establishment that we have, that we're fighting today when it comes to things that are not quite so easily explainable by their, you know, their point of view. So, yeah, I think it's an amazing, mysterious world out there. And like many, many others, that's why it appeals to me. And that's why I like to look at these things. But they do look back.
Right. Well, what's your opinion on the Pentagon, you know, releasing the information about the UFO study that they've been conducting?
Oh, that's a bunch of most of that is nonsense. The way it's being reported is that's not what really is going on. I think that there's a perception management project going on behind all that. You're of course referring really to the TTSA, to the Stars Academy nonsense. I think it's a load of crap that a bunch of people who don't know their ufology history are embracing and buying into, really out of just the desperation to believe that, oh, it's going to happen, we're going to get disclosure, or now they're calling it confirmation. I say that with air quotes. I really would like to see more people be cautious with this stuff, because this is not what it's being presented. This is not, you know, this ATIP thing, this is not the first time that the government, the Pentagon, the military, you know, has looked closely at UFOs. Everybody over 35 years old has heard of Project Blue Book and the projects before Blue Book. I mean, they've been seriously looking at UFOs for 80-something years, you know. So the idea, when I hear these people out there, wow, they decided to, you know, start looking at this in 2002. I mean, it's just, my head wants to explode. And everybody I know older than 35 who's been around long enough to read a book about ufology history knows that that's ridiculous that government interest, Pentagon interest started in the early 2000s. Come on. But see, they know, the people spinning this crap, they know that there's a bunch of people out there, a new generation of people interested in UFOs, a new generation, okay? And they want to get their perception, you know, in their grasp. They want to spin the narrative to suit their objectives. So they're getting these newbies, these babes in the woods where UFOs are concerned, to buy into this crap, and I think they're using TTSA to do that. So that's what I think of that.
Okay.
What does the Native Americans think the UFOs are?
Well, my understanding is that, you know, they see them as star people, for example, you know, people from other worlds. I think in some cases, you know, there might be some interdimensional ideas, themes going on there. And then there's a very interesting theme that happens to intrigue me at present, and I haven't delved into it enough to speak intelligently about it, if I'm saying anything intelligent at all. And that is the idea that it's associated with the dead. And I think some of the Native American cultures get into that a little bit. But it's very interesting. I think it's something to pay attention to. Any of our older cultures, everybody interested in this should take a look at what they and the past cultures have said, what their histories and their mythologies say about these strange beings, because somewhere in there you might get better info even than modern day contactees in some cases. Because remember, the modern day contactee, so to speak, unfortunately these days, has a preconceived notion as to what they're seeing. Most people are like, oh, I'm seeing a spacecraft from another world, and this alien, from this other planet is, flying above my head here, or coming to visit me and spread their message, when actually it could be someone from another dimension. It could be any other kind of being, possibly. Or it could not be anything fantastic. It could be somebody wanting to convince the contactee, the witness, that they are something from another world or another dimension. That's the other aspect that, people have to consider. But in our times, we have the preconceived notion that it's got to be an ET in a flying saucer, so to speak, from another planet, when actually, when you look at the ancient accounts, they could be talking about something else, entirely. But it depends on the tradition you're looking at, I guess, is the more clear answer.
Okay.
What are your thoughts on Area 51, and do you believe that the U.S. government has evidence of any UFOs or ETs hidden within the compound?
If they were going to hide something like that, a place like Area 51 would be logical, because, it's restricted, highly restricted, and, it's out in the middle of nowhere, so why not? I'm not saying that it's not, or they never have, but it's my personal opinion, based on my time in what I did working for the government. My opinion is they figured out a long time ago to not have the government be the custodian of such evidence and such information. And here's why. While the government can classify something indefinitely, okay, on up to a certain point and in certain ways, it can be discoverable, say, if enough congressional power demanded it, or what have you. The information or the material is not proprietary as such, okay, for the government. In other words, there is some way for the public to kind of force the government's hand on some level, in some degree, to reveal or admit what they have or what they know. Now, remember what I said. It's something in the United States. We're not like England, where there's a 50-year rule. After 50 years, classified has to become unclassified and made public. We don't have that in the United States, okay? Something can remain classified indefinitely, but what they really want is culpable deniability. They would like to be able to say, we don't have any flying saucers stored anywhere. What are you talking about? So what they figured out a long time ago was that private corporations, okay, their information and their material is proprietary, meaning it's their property. And private people, private companies do not have to reveal to the public what they possess, okay? So it's my opinion that years ago they figured out, wait a minute, if we get a crash saucer we're going to analyze it, but we're going to hand over the custodial duties, the custodianship of this flying saucer to this private contractor. That way, when the public says, hey, U.S. government, do you have a flying saucer in storage somewhere? We can say, or we, Freudian slip there, the government can say, oh, no, we don't. We don't have a flying saucer anywhere. We're not hiding any aliens from you. And they're telling the truth. That's their culpable deniability. Because Wackenhut or Bechtel or Lockheed Martin or whoever, actually has it. And they're not required by U.S. law to tell the public, the people, no matter how much the public stomps their feet and pitches a fit for disclosure, they are not required by law to reveal that if they have that knowledge or material. And that's just the way it is. And that ought to make you, that's why when little tidbits about like this TTSA and Pentagon thing come out where, Bigelow says, oh, yeah, there's a place where, the metals are stored and stuff like that, that's kind of a teaser, because they know that guys like me and other people know about this proprietary thing. See, that what they do is they kind of fly close to the truth, but not quite to the truth with stuff, so that it sounds reasonable and logical. But that's what I think as far as the government, storing anything at Area 51. They don't have to store it at Area 51. The corporation that they've given custodianship for it could have it anywhere. They could have it in a vault in the middle of Manhattan. See, because everybody's looking for government facilities. Very few people until recently have been looking at private corporations. In movies, but researchers and stuff have really been, while they're busy looking at Area 51, while they're busy looking at, whatever the latest mystery base is, the flying saucer could actually be in a building in downtown LA or a hangar at LAX or in a vault, in San Diego, not hiding in plain sight, but surprisingly closer to the population than one might think.
Wow. Well, you was on History Channel's Ancient Aliens. What are your thoughts on ancient astronaut theory?
Oh, I think basically it's correct. You could. We could all disagree with the finer details, and some of the conclusions that they come to, that they draw. But I think basically I think von Daniken's been on the right track. I think Giorgio and of course, David and all the other people you see on that show, all the people that theorize as such, I think it's basically what happened.
Well, seeing how it's so late, and I know that we kind of had little technical problems there at the beginning.
Interestingly.
I appreciate.
And I have to say, in the last 5 minutes, an echo has suddenly appeared in my audio on my end, which has not been there for the last hour and a half. So it's just an interesting little tidbit to share.
Oh my gosh!
And what did we start talking about in the last 10 minutes? You asked me about Area 51 and whether the government stored this stuff, right? That's something to process there.
Mm-hmm. Apparently they don't like the questions, or they don't like me. You talking to me.
I think what I usually hate this to say this kind of stuff because it sounds egomaniacal and all that stuff, but. Yeah, I could see where, they don't like, Air Force Captain Bosley, inactive reserve, U.S. Air Force, saying that TTSA and the spin is a bunch of nonsense. I'm sure, and I don't think they like me talking about, I could see, I won't say for sure, but I could see where, they don't like me, not going along with the perception management. So, it's, again, like I said earlier, I don't lose sleep. If somebody's watching me, paying attention to me, glitching my appearances, I don't lose sleep over that.
I don't either. We're going to be like Art Bell.
Yeah, I'm not worried about it.
Yeah, I ain't either. Well, sir, like I said, I appreciate you coming on the show, and I want to get you back on the show because there's a whole lot more stuff I'd like to delve more deep into. This was just to, get people, the audience to get an idea who you are and your expertise and your research and such. And again, I appreciate you coming on the show. And do you have a website that people can go to, or they have any questions or concerns?
Sure. And I hope they still like me after listening to me. But if anybody's interested, my books are only available through print on demand. I'm one of those small press publishers who left Amazon because they're just not good for small press independent publishers. I had to leave them. And so my books are print on demand at lulu.com, LULU.com. And they're real books. They're not some spiral-bound, typewritten stuff. These are professional quality books. I've been a publisher since 2002, so that's going on 16 years now. I've published 5 or 6 other authors. So these are real good quality books. And, lulu.com. And also I'm at the Walter Bosley channel at YouTube. You can find me on Facebook or Twitter. Also, I have a blog, empireofthewheel.blogspot.com. So, look for me in those places. Look for my books if you're interested at Lulu. And I look forward to being on again. I thank you for having me on.
Oh, thank you so much, sir, for coming on and taking the time and letting me pick your brain.
Sure.
Well, you have a good night, and again, thank you.
All right, you too. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, bye-bye. Well, I want to thank Walter Bosley for coming on and taking the time to come on the show. We have nothing but love and respect, for him and the job that he's doing. Like I said, we welcome him back anytime. Doors are always open. That's it for us tonight. Again, I want to thank Walter Bosley for coming on the show. I thank everyone who took the time to listen in. I also want to thank my dark-haired Raven for sidekicking with me. You work so hard.
I know. I'm just overworked over here.
I know. I work too hard. I'd like to give a big shout-out to the Vibe Radio Network and Ryan for putting up with us, and also to the first responders, our men and women in the armed services. You're going to have to wait till I flip the page because I am scripted because I can't remember this shit. Armed services, and thank you all for your service and sacrifices you all make every day to keep us safe. Our guest for next Thursday, next Thursday night, is who? Rhonda Claudille. That'll be March 22nd at 10 p.m. So everyone, you get a chance, check out her Facebook page. It's Nickerson Sneed House Museum, I think. And you can go to our website at blackdiamondps.org or blogtalkradio.com/Within the Chaos. Also, we have our YouTube site set up and running, so you can check out our shows, our past shows, and I get these shows up as soon as I can, the new ones. So everyone have a good night and a safe weekend.
Sweet dreams, everyone.
Ooh, she said sweet dreams. So what do y'all want to listen to go out on? Let's see. I did try to play Major Tom earlier, didn't I?